are going to be talking to you today about a project being run by CTIQ. You may have come across it at last year's National HREC Conference, or it may be new to you. Before I begin, I do want to acknowledge the Indigenous people. I live and work in Nipaluna, Hobart, which is the land of the Muwininya people, but I'm coming to you today on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, which is the land we now call Melbourne. Next slide, please, Tanya. Bit of a roadmap as to where we're going today. I'm going to briefly give you some background about what CTIQ is, a little bit about what the Informed project is and where it's at, as well as our plans for moving forward with it. And then Tanya will give you a deeper dive into the consumer focus groups we're going to be running as part of this. And I think that will fit really nicely with what Ian's talked to us about in terms of relational autonomy, to really thinking about what do consumers need for specific study types rather than just this more generic approach to consent that we might sometimes have taken with the development of participant information sheet and consent templates. Next slide, please. Who's CTIQ? So CTIQ is an Australian member-based organisation. We were founded in 2018 with the founding members being Bellbury Limited, the Australian Clinical Trial Alliance, the George Institute, the NHMRC Clinical Trials Centre, and they were joined by Medicines Australia and Medical Technology Association of Australia, and they remain our executive committee. And we have now about 50 members across Australia who, with the broad goal of taking on projects that are going to improve the efficiency, quality and effectiveness of research and or the protection of participant welfare. Next slide, please. This is just a brief snapshot of our members because I think it gives you a sense of where CTIQ is coming from. You can see we've got consumers and consumer groups, CROs, industries, medical research institutes, government, clinical trial groups and phase 1 units. So really that is what I see CTIQ's key benefit being for the sector, that we can approach problems collaboratively that perhaps none of us can resolve in isolation. Next slide, please. The Informed project, which is what Tanya and I are talking to you about, is really CTIQ's flagship program at the minute. It is very much has been and continues to be the focus of our attention for the past year. We have a broad project team. We've got about 35 members, including HREC members, among others, really trying to think about what approach can we take to developing information sheets and consent form that puts the consumer at the centre and really centres the specific decision that a participant needs to make about whether or not to enrol in that particular research project. Now, we haven't limited that just to clinical trials. We are trying to develop both a template and a broader approach that is going to work for clinical research generally. And again, I want to go back to that relational autonomy idea that Ian so helpfully brought to us, because we're really trying to think through the differences between what might be needed in that template, depending on what the research is and who the participant group is. Next slide, please. Okay. So this is our big project, as all of you would be aware. So it needs a little bit of scope. First and foremost, this is not about e-consent. We are very aware that researchers are increasingly moving into an e-consent space and we aim to facilitate that, but we're not using this to provide an e-consent platform. We're also not looking at the process of consent in terms of the discussions that people will have with clinical trial nurses and others. What we're trying to do is to provide content that can be adapted for different consent platforms, whether that be paper-based or electronic, that will provide the material information that people need to know in order to make a legally and ethically valid decision. Okay, next slide, please. Overall, our goal is for the sector to use this. And I won't speak more to it than that. We are in ongoing conversations with the NHMRC. They're very aware of our project. They are very positive about our project and the ability to put it up on the NHMRC website once we've got into a stage where we can show broad sector support. Okay, next click. Okay, and I think I already went through that. So next slide. Here is just a snapshot of what the draft looks. Oh, sorry, next slide. We must have a slightly old version here. Okay. This is a snapshot of what it looks like at the moment. This is one of the studies that we are testing out in the focus groups Tanya will be running. It is still a draft, which is really being done as a way of showing people what it can look like and figuring out if we're on the right track. This one that we've developed, one of 3 consumer focus groups we're going to be doing this year, is for a clinical drug trial. The original information sheet started off at about 15 pages on our template. It is now about 7 pages, including the consent page. You can see we've tried to include more in the way of white space, really easy to navigate headings and subheadings, really aiming to give a better participant experience. We're also encouraging the use of diagrams and visuals, and that's something Tanya is going to be exploring with focus group participants to see, is this helping people? Is it helping them make the decision that they need to make? Next page, please. One part of this is work we're doing with Cassandra, the Health Studies National Database, where we're trying to develop a national data sharing statement to provide an ethically and legally robust basis for future data and sample sharing. We have a specific focus group that is going to be looking at that statement, and that's probably a separate topic of conversation in terms of the content of what's in there, but just something to be aware of that is part of this informed project. Next slide, please. Okay, next steps and beyond. Click, please. Next step of the process is getting consumer feedback. Now, the consumers need to be at the centre of this process. Our project team has worked up a draft because we can't go to people with a blank page. It's not fair, and we need to make sure that the requirements of the national statement have been met, or at least we think that they've been met. So we're taking something to consumers, but being quite humble about the fact that what we take to them might need to change quite considerably. Once we've heard the consumer voice, we'll make changes, and then we're going to do broader stakeholder outreach, including with the HREC community. We're really hoping for a few HRECs to do a mock review of the template for a few studies, again, just to see, are we meeting the brief? Will HRECs be able to review studies that have used this template and find them in accordance with the regulatory requirements, and perhaps even surpassing the regulatory requirements, which of course is our hope. Early-ish next year, we'll do a soft launch for early adopters. This is what I like to think of as the beta version, where we'll release what we have so far. We'll bring it to the sector and say, hey, have a go, try using it. Let us know how it goes. Does it work for your kind of study? Does it not? Have you put it to an HREC? Were they okay with it? Have you asked consumers what they thought of it? And so that is our process before we finalise the template and hopefully get an HMRC endorsement. Next slide. I'll hand over now to Tanya. Tanya is our resident clinical trials consultant who is leading our consumer focus group endeavour, and she's going to talk to you in more detail about what that's going to entail and how it will feed into our final product.
Thank you, Lisa. And as Lisa said, we're really moving into the next phase of this project, which are the demonstration projects. Really to start the ball rolling on the creation of a library of lovely examples, which Lisa alluded to. And what we're doing is adopting methodology that I used in a study I ran called Snapchat, which was effectively, we conducted 4 focus groups with consumers to help us craft the PICF for the SNAP trial, which is a large international adaptive platform trial testing the comparative effectiveness of antibiotics to treat Staph aureus bacteremia. And Snapchat tested 2 concepts with SAB survivors effectively that were in the 4 focus groups we held. One was laid consent, which we'll come back to in a second, but also trying to get a better idea of what the information, the minimum information that people wanted to make an informed decision to go into the SNAP trial. And it's a good study to choose because it was so complex, you know, with loads of 5-syllable antibiotics and different randomization time points being adaptive, etc. So it was a lovely example. And we reckoned that the PICF would have been about 15 pages long, but the ethics committee actually approved a 3.5-page participant information sheet, which is now being used to recruit in many countries. So that was good. So SNAP, however, was a low risk, what I'd say a low risk study, because it was marketed product licensed indication type thing. And the findings might not be generalizable to the rest of the project. So that was one of the reasons why we thought that focus groups would be good, having different demonstration projects. So we have a repurposed drug trial being run by the Australian Kidney Trials Network, a lovely group. We are delighted also to have an industry trial, a biotronics trial with a pre-market pacemaker. And at the other end of the scale, we have an online survey run by an organization, a study being run by an organization that looks at youth mental health, Origin. And I think I also need to mention that there's not just the consumers who are our user testing. We are effectively, by making people put together the test picks for these trials, making the research teams be involved in that, it's been really useful because we're finding out what some of the issues are, you know, whether there's formatting issues or whatever, you know. So I think that's been really useful and will continue to be useful in the future. The other thing I wanted to say is we are trying to preserve all the aims of PICFs, not only to make them understandable, which is, you know, key, but also they're often used as an aid memoir. And we didn't want to lose that, you know, that people, I think it was Lisa actually that said to me that sometimes people cut out the bit about the schedule of visits and what's going to happen and put it on their fridge. You know, we can't, it's certainly for clinical trials, you know, that's still useful. So, you know, we want to try and encourage, you know, diagrams and nice ways of giving that information. Oh, sorry, too fast. So what is layered consent? It's effectively a situation, as you may have heard, I've talked about it before, I think, where we have a PICF, which might be on paper, it might be electronic, and noting, especially for clinical trials or in any interventional research, the consent process is the PICF is just the basis of a discussion, effectively. And I think we sometimes forget that, and it becomes the be all and the end all. It isn't for a lot of trials. So it's making sure it's the basis of the consent discussion and it is concise. So that's a short PICF with additional, as we're calling it, supplementary information elsewhere, which might be on paper or it might be on a website. Certainly the SNAP trial have lovely information about health literacy, about SAB or Staph aureus bacteremia, more about the study, more about side effects, more about everything on the website for those that have higher informational needs. And I think that's the key message. And I wanted to just reassure everybody that the concept isn't new. In fact, you know, I pinched it from colleagues in the UK who've already got a template out for many years. The US common rule has changed to say consents have to start with concise and focused presentation of key information. And of course, the national statement, being as beautifully flexible as it is, you know, not only talks about staged and tiered information, it also has these lovely words that say, in order to address the variations in needs or characteristics of participants, which is another impetus for the methodology that we're proposing for this project. And the other thing people ask me is, okay, so what is sufficient information for informed consent? Well, what I tend to respond to by saying is, if you look at the chapters in the national statement that are about consent, they don't use that term. The national statement talks about sufficient information and adequate understanding of, you know, what's going to happen and the implications of participation. But if you look internationally, and I certainly did, quite a lot. What we find is very, very similar thinking about what is the minimum requirement, which I've listed on this slide. You probably have them. You know, the nature and purpose of research from common law. And I suppose research, we've got to make sure everybody understands that it is voluntary. The dual purpose of when we're combining clinical care with research, which is treatment and deriving generalizable new knowledge, you know, making sure that's clear. And also right at the end, not only the risks, benefits, and alternatives, but also the difference in what would have happened to a patient if they hadn't gone into the research, if they are patients, and what will happen when they're going into a study. And that includes some privacy information. Extra things might be being kept by different groups and all sorts of things. So all of that is all relevant for information decisions. So in terms of the concepts here, we have layered consent, which means that layers can be physically separated. I suppose that's quite novel. And that people can sign the consent having read only the first layer, as we say. So this gives people the choice. And certainly I think my major theme in the focus groups that we did and what we're publishing is that was the main finding. People wanted agency in choice in the information that they had to read if they felt that they're the sort of person that didn't need much. So the only other thing I wanted to quickly tell you about is one of the I was doing a talk, I can't remember, actor or somewhere, probably for this type of integrated consent process. And someone said, how do you know there's a problem in Australia? So it sort of spurred us to do a study or collecting inpatient information leaflets. And Gordon, thank you. And everybody else that actually provided them, thank you, because we collected in quite a lot. We analysed them and we found what I know you all expect, but at least it's quantified the situation for our cohort of information leaflets. The median length was 9 pages. The median length of commercial PICFs, in fact, no, just the information sheet. There's often extra 5 pages of consent forms added to this, but the median length was 18 pages, just so that you know. And the readability score using SMOG was 13. So that's 5 grades over. So that means we've got work to do on incorporating plain language and all that goes with that. And I think that's I think it's a really important aim of this project. And you know, the thing is, we've got beautiful guidance in Australia. The Commission often talk about this universal precautions approach, which is an international concept used for health literacy, where you never know who has low literacy. So the default is to write for people with low literacy. So that's very much something that will be really nice to incorporate and give people those ideas. And so where will we land? Well, the whole project is, as I think Lisa said, is about incorporating the values and preferences of consumers into the consent development process or PIC development process. And I think this, as I said earlier, this project will be useful to clarify the scope of what we're doing and also the level of flexibility that we're going to need. You know, the thinking is we probably will need flexibility to incorporate the requirements of the massive range of PICFs that get developed in Australia and elsewhere. Thank you. I think that's, oh, no, sorry, one more slide. So CTIQ website and Inform project. And I just want to call out to Sonia. She's on holiday, but she's been running this project so well and so tightly that she's not here today, unfortunately, but I hope she's listening. Okay, thanks.
Thanks so much, Tanya, and it's a great update from last year, and I think Sonia gave us an overview last year, and I do recall providing those information sheets, and it's great to see the quantifiable information. I think one thing that today or this session has at least highlighted, and even Greg Pratt's session, is this need for sort of different modalities for consent in order to address literacy levels, and I think for us to expect even the CTIQ approach of reducing the length of the form is maybe not quite addressing all of those potential modalities by which people can learn. Interestingly, for anyone that cares to look on the question and answer site, Roberta Littleford, thank you, Roberta, has put up a couple of papers of our evidence around what are they now? Effective optimized patient information materials on recruitment in a lung cancer screening trial, and performance-based readability testing of participant information for a phase 3 IVF trial. So, when you look back on Q&A, please download those things and see. So, Tanya, two points, one from me and one from Natalie Giles. The one from me is, I remember in the development of the human research ethics application and taking people on this journey, including the ethics committees, which had members of 35 ethics committees. And I see from what Lisa has provided that there's going to be this separation of these groups. And I do wonder if that could have a counterproductive outcome if you don't take people on that journey, that the right groups to start with. And I will also add in Natalie Giles's question, which is, are you engaging commercial sponsors in this process?
Well, yes, one of the demonstration projects is a Biotronic trial. So we're lucky to be testing, so effectively they're an early adopter. They're very, very engaged with the project. I'll say to you, interestingly, what they told us, which actually shocked me, was they get their PICF from Germany, or wherever they are, where the head office is, and it gets a lot longer when it goes through the users, when it's put into the NHMRC template, much longer. So I was surprised by that, to be honest, because I know what some of the German ones are like. So it's yes. So the answer is yes. And we're hoping we can't expect commercial sponsors to be all up, ready now to do this. I think what will happen is, as the concepts embed and are promulgated, then hopefully, if they see other companies doing this, that they will think, well, maybe it is something we can do. But I think it will be quite a slow process.
Yeah, and look, and taking in Pippa's points. Sorry, Lisa, my apologies. You carry on.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to say, we do have a number of sponsors that are CTIQ members that are actively involved in a project team. One of the reasons we've separated it out a little to answer Gordon's question is the message we consistently got from people was to be brave. And the more you speak to people who are really embedded in this world, who are very used to the way our current PICFs look and the current amount of information we provide, the harder it is to be brave. And that's why we're doing these consumer consultations first, to have that as our guiding light. We will then consult broadly as well, and our project team has broad representation to start with. We did surveys over a year ago now to find out what people thought. But we were worried that if we didn't do the consumer workshops early and use that as our guiding pinnacle, it is very, very easy to slip back into something very much akin to how things look now with some tweaks. And we didn't want that to be where this project went.
Oh, no, look, and I remember Bellberry started this process some years ago and maybe didn't go through quite the right process, and it sort of fell a bit. But it does make me think, Lisa, and tell me what you think of this. This being really about the participant and taking the concept of relational autonomy here. At the end of the day, perhaps what we need is a dual-pronged approach where we actually have to build in this encouragement to take this to as many people as possible when you want to make a decision, rather than going, oh my God, it's 40 pages long.
Yeah, and Tanya and I have really talked about that, about perhaps where this will end up is a template that is quite different to what we have now, where we'll have subheadings and we'll have some suggested phrasing for maybe not even all of the subheadings, but an approach to go along with it, where we might say, actually, to answer this subheading, you need to do some consumer engagement. And that's something that we've talked about, that perhaps one of the problems we have now is we spend far too much time wordsmithing, far too much time trying to have a template language to cover all eventualities, instead of having some principles for navigation. And we know that going down that road will be more work for people and people will resist it. But it's certainly something Tanya and I have talked about.
I don't know. I don't agree people will resist this. From a personal perspective, the NHMRC templates, and having been part of their development, are really not fit for purpose. Ultimately, Tanya, as you showed, or Lisa, as you showed, those headings of risk benefit, dissemination, etc., are ultimately the headings. And under that, put what you like. Just don't follow the templates because they don't really serve us in every conceivable way. So I think the principles are the most important. Now, Tanya or Lisa, any final points there before we head off?
The only thing I'd say is I think an interesting part of Tanya's workshops will be finding out how much consistency there is between the group, essentially how much black letter we have where everyone says, yep, those sentences are important and needed, and where we have epic divergence depending on the kind of study or the particular group of people we have in the room.
Well, can I say on behalf of everyone on this call and every ethics committee, please complete this project because nothing good. I think, oh my goodness, I see another rubbish template, and I just think this is just not doing anyone any favors. So,
we've been duly warned by the NHMRC that it's not allowed to be rubbish.
Yeah, very, very good. Well, I'm glad the NHMRC used that as well. So please may I thank